Hey, everybody. I'm the Metal. I'm a man of many names and many jobs, but today we're specifically talking about comics. In that regard, I'm the creator of a comic series called X Dynamis Chaos. It's kind of more than just a singular series, it is a world of multiple stories. This panel specifically being I guess, an introduction to the entire comic creation process, we're going to assume that you are either an artist who already knows how to do the art, or a writer that already knows how to do the writing, or a combination of the two. You don't really have to be good at either or both. You can start off with a crappy comic. Honestly, doing crappy stuff is the best way to start anything, and then watching yourself go up. A lot of people love to watch along in the process. But if you're trying to make something good off the bat, we're assuming you can do one or the other. Most comic creation is a collaborative process between writers and artists. A lot of people don't do both, but you might be somebody like me who handles literally every part of the process. Like, talk about creative credits on my own stuff or others. I am a writer, penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, and editor. So I kind of just handle everything in the comic creation process. So we're going to start off speaking again. I actually do have it. If you didn't catch the name of it, because it is a weird name, but I love it. One of those guys who I love weird things. It is called X Dynamis Chaos. I have my own website, but I also put everything on Newgrounds as well. If I make it myself, if I work with another artist and they're not on Newgrounds, I haven't put it up. But I'm willing to work with anybody, and if you are Newgrounds, we co-authorship with the sidebar thing, we can work something out. But if you're starting the creation process, one of the most important things you got to do is realize that it all starts with the writing, right? So you have to plan out what your story is. You do have to be a writer to some extent. A lot of illustrators who just put up one shot pieces and stuff can get away with not having to world build or anything along those lines. But what makes a comic, which we're just going to use the word comic for the sake of this panel to talk about the whole field or this whole medium, is sequential art, where you're talking about manga or manhwa, BDs over in France. If you're talking about just single strips that you'd find in the funny pages, doesn't matter. It's all sequential art. And what makes it what it is that you're telling a story through a series of images, often accompanied by words, where the blanks are filled in by the imagination of the audience. But you don't want their imagination to take over too much, because you kind of want everybody to be on the same page of what the story is. Yeah. So if you're going to start off, you got to start off with a script. Personally, I write my scripts in a very specific way, which I have them up. This is how I would write a script if I'm doing this by myself, which is a story I haven't published yet. I do everything really shorthand when I'm doing it by myself. I write a synopsis. I go through, I label how many pages I'm going to do. Each page, I give like a very specific action to the page, because you kind of want a page to thematically encompass one thing, right? So I'll have the character doing a thing, and that will be the action of the page. Then I'll divide the page down into several different panels that I will give out a layout, usually the shorthands for myself. Then I'll describe what's happening in each panel. Again, this is not a very good example of a script, because this is how I write for myself. I have another example of how I write things for myself as well, right here. And you see, this is for a short that's going to be in a longer series. Same thing. I'll put maybe the cast of who's going to be in the comic at the top of it as well. It's very important to know this before you start writing the actual content of a script. You really want to know what the major theme is, which is the synopsis of here. It can be anywhere between a single sentence to a paragraph, and you want to know who's going to be in the story, right? To show you something more complicated, this is what a script starts looking like when I'm working with other people and I'm just the writer on it. This is for a single page short, and it's already getting to be multiple pages long. You see at the top, there is the title, then the synopsis. Then I start describing the characters. There's actually only two characters in here, but I have to give really detailed descriptions on the characters because neither of these characters have a mock-up at this point. So that's going to be up to the artist to kind of figure out how they should be interpreted.
You've talked a lot about
Af-
pages. Mirror Art wants to know, how do you determine how many pages you'll need?
To determine how many pages you'll need, and I was going to get to this later in production, but this is something you do need to think about at the beginning before you go out. You have to figure out what format you're working in. I primarily work in a mixed format of webcomic first, print comic after. So I even designed all my chapters for my webcomic with the idea that I'm going to print them. And with that, I kind of run them like floppies. Your average floppy is going to run somewhere between 20 to 24 pages. If you are printing, you have to count in fours because of the way the pages fold. So all your interior pages have to be divisible by four. And then you'll have a cover with like an inside cover, front and back as well. So that'll still end up being four between your cover pages. If you're just doing a short can be literally anything. Um, I define a short myself as being between 1 to 10 pages, and it really just matters on the content that you're dealing with, right? So, like I said, I normally run a roughly 20 pages. I don't hold myself to that with the webcomic. Most of them will be on or about. One of my chapters is like 19, another one is like 21 pages. I have ways of filling in the gaps with like bonus material if that is the case. You just have to push it to something divisible by four if you're doing that. Let's see, where was I? Yeah. So you also see when I get to the actual scripting part here for just a single page, this is a 9-panel page too. Um, this is a uh, within the script format, multiple pages, right? Just to describe one page of comic content. And you have to be very detailed when you're working with somebody else so that they can kind of understand what you mean. Sometimes you want to leave it up to the artist if they're really good at what they're doing. You can leave camera angles and stuff up to them. You can leave design details up to them. But I work with a lot of new artists. I actually have a program on my site. Let's see, actually, I think I have the page pulled up at the moment. Yes, I do. I actually have a program on my website where for people who are trying to learn how to do comics themselves, I will take the writer and editor role, and I will teach them the things they need to do to progress through a comic, much like I'm doing right here, right now. You will get a script from me. You will get to participate in as many parts of the creation as you want from the artist end, if that is your goal. You can even try lettering if that's something you want to get better at. It's just an opportunity I have for people who work through a short. You're not going to be pushed into doing a full comic because a lot of people don't realize how much work that is. If you're doing this every day, it can take a month to make a comic by yourself. If you're doing like a full, let me pull this down. If you're doing like a full little floppy, like right here, this thing can take like a month to get through for just like a little bit of time reading. Like it probably takes somewhere between 5 to 30 minutes to read a floppy, depending on how much time you actually sit there to soak in all the information on hand. And so I'll work through it with an artist like that. I've done it several times. Some of the pages you'll see here when I start bringing up reference material for what we're talking about will be from other artists that I've worked with. Some of them will be my own because I am an illustrator myself. But after you're done with the scripting phase, after you feel you have, that's actually not what I want to pull up. That'll be in a second. After you feel you have your script ready enough that somebody else can interpret it and actually tell the story that you're trying to tell, you'll be moving on to the conceptual pieces because a lot of work goes into making a comic, especially if you're making a web comic or a long form comic, something that might be lasting for years. You have no idea how many issues of it or chapters you're going to do. What you need to do is you need to make character art, right? And character art can kind of show up in one or two different ways. As an artist myself, I tend to actually make mock-ups of like official character art that will end up on the site, that will end up on profile pages. Here's one of the characters that will be in one of the stories that I'll use as an example. Um, I also show up in my own comics because I'm a fun guy myself. So who wouldn't want to read about me? Um, but I'll do all of these little mock-up characters so that people can actually know what they look like. Sometimes we start working on a script that I don't have everything like 100% prepared on. So, having to give information to the artist so they can figure out what they're doing, they will end up making references and mock-ups themselves. Here is a reference sheet that an artist that I'm working with, her name is Ray Miss, did for one of the orphan girls that shows up in a story we're talking about. This is Jenny. She's a very, very important character. We also, where is it? Yeah, that's not the picture I was looking for. Here we go. And she also did a mock-up of one of the main villains. This is not actually even what the final uh, pages look like. You don't want to waste too much time doing a mock-up on a character. You really just want to end up getting the angles down, knowing what the character will look like from different positions and stuff. Turnarounds are a very common way of doing things. Here's another mock-up from artist called Mark Oliver, who was working with me on a story that honestly ended up dying in the water due to production problems, but I still have some examples from it. And this is about a girl who ends up turning into a rabbit. It's more complicated than that, but I don't have time to actually go over my stories unless people ask questions about it later in the Q&A. This is about production. And so you really just want to make sure you know what your character looks like from almost every angle, because you're probably going to have to end up drawing them from every single angle at some point in time. One of the big things about comics is it's like making a movie or a TV show, right? It's actually kind of like the least expensive way of telling a story in a visual format, which gets kind of scary when you think about how expensive a comic can get when you get into the production process. But as somebody working on the web, it can be basically free to work on. And this size comic right here, this floppy, is like a TV show. It's like an episode of a TV show, like a 30-minute episode. If people are really staring at everything in the pages, it can take them half an hour to read it. And you should basically time a comic based on that.
We have a question related to the format for comics on the subject of that timing and whatnot. Casey J wants
Yeah.
to know, how do you create the format for comics, like creating how the comics should be read? I assume that means left to right, top to bottom, maybe the flow of pages and panels.
That depends on the comics are a medium, but it depends on the media, right? So if you're like a webtoon artist, obviously there's a very specific format that succeeds on the infinite scrolling of the webtoon, where you kind of just want to have it one panel wide, some gaps in between so that people can't see the next panel until they scroll to it. And that will judge a lot by the pacing. Basically, you kind of want to leave cliffhangers on every page or other page, depending on your format. If you're doing a webcomic like I'm doing, and the same applies for Webtoon, you just kind of change the way it looks. I do everything in a normal comic page format because I plan on printing it later, and I upload only one page at a time. So you kind of want a bit on every single page that stands on its own. You kind of want a story that flows together if you're doing something that is a serial like I am. If you're doing something that's more akin to a classic funny page thing, like Penny Arcade is a good example of something that is structured more like the funny pages. Then you just want to make sure that every single page is a bit, and that will decide your pacing. I want to build something for the page turn. So I want every page to be a bit, whether it's a joke, an action sequence, or something that stands on its own, but I also want every other page to be a page turner, as they call them, or kind of like a cliffhanger. You kind of want to leave your audience hanging at the end of your even pages so that it makes them want to turn the next page to see like how this little event results. And you just want to keep them turning over and over again. So sometimes you might want to leave like an explosion in the last panel of one of your pages so they could like, oh man, what was the result of this explosion when they turn over? Things like that. Like you really want to design your pages around the idea that you want people to click on the next page. That's the number one thing,
Awesome.
whether it's classic format or not.
Right on. We have a question from Neko Eye
Yeah.
about visual appeal. So I'm planning on creating a not safe for work dojin eventually, but everything is so intimidating, especially on backgrounds because I suck at them. I'm just scared it won't be visually pleasing, I guess. How would you tackle that?
The way I would tackle that is to focus on the characters because that is the number one important thing when it comes to comics. That is what everybody's always looking at, is what the character looks like, and also the action that's going on in the panel. Even if it's people talking, a lot of times the action is just the facial expression to try to sell the emotion of what they're saying. People don't actually pay that much attention to backgrounds, believe it or not. If you are moving to a new environment, you do need to have like an establishing shot. Here's a good example in episode 2 of X Dynamis Chaos. Right as we turn, I actually draw the skyline for Dallas, right? So people know where we are. I'll be honest, in a lot of panels, I don't even draw backgrounds. And if you read a lot of manga and even just a lot of American comics, you'll start to pick up, if you're really paying attention, half of these panels don't have backgrounds in them. People do not draw backgrounds if they can afford not to, especially if it's like a close-up on somebody's face, if it's something that's just moving really, really fast. Hell, you can put speed lines as the background half the time and it works. It doesn't matter what the content is, right? If somebody's shocked, you can actually just use speed lines coming out of the direction of the person as a background. If you're doing something not safe for work and say two characters are having sex, you can just draw speed lines in the direction of the thrusting or whatever's going on. And seriously, people don't notice this though, right? Like, because you're not paying attention. But go back and read like any of your favorite manga. Even JoJo's does this all the time. I know you know this, Stan.
Yeah.
Half the panels are just like speed lines or some type of texture in the background.
So a follow-up question that I think is perfect for what you were just talking about. When you're about to write your story, what is the first thing to focus on? Characters, story, what the story's about, setting?
Yeah. That actually all of them or none of them, right? It depends on what type of story you're writing. And this is why it really comes down to being a writer. So it's like writing any other type of story. If you're writing a novel, if you're writing a TV show, if you're writing an animation, right? You have to understand like, why am I writing this story? After you understand why you're writing the story, then it'll depend. Is this a character study? Is like the growth of this character the primary reason you're writing this story? Then that's the most important thing to start with, or the cast of characters. Is it a piece of historical fiction or like an historical event within your world? Then it might be important to actually get the setting and the plot down first. And then you have to work in, it's still a narrative and characters are important to the narrative. So after you have your setting and plot, how can I work this to become a character study? Because ultimately every story is a character study, because that's all people care about is the narrative of what's going on with these people, even if it changes main characters over time, right? JoJo's is another good example of that. You're not following the same main character every single part. So the world is the most important part, but every single part is centered around that group of characters.
Araki
So
in his book also specifically talks about characters being the most important thing.
yes, yeah. I mean, what you will ultimately end up focusing on the character. My contention is just where you're starting, right? And that is the ultimate goal of the story. But after you figure out where you're starting, it's the character, the character, the character, the character. It will always end up being the character.
Right on.
because you're a character in your own life. So this is how the audience relates to whatever you're writing, is through the characters.
One last joke question before before you continue on your plan stuff. What's it
Yeah.
like singing for Judas Priest?
Yeah, I keep seeing that over and over again. um, it's funny too, is half the time I actually do have weights on my arms that kind of look like those bracers that he wears. I do like Judas Priest. This is a good band. I don't often end up singing their songs though. So, but I like a lot of music. I'm not really all that picky. So as we're getting on, now that we got our references done, which is where we left off, it actually comes down to paneling. And the very first phase, when you'll be working with your artist, whether you or your artist or not, when I'm my own artist, I actually treat it like I'm working with a different person. And I'll even get in arguments with myself. However mentally sound that is, I don't know. But I think you have to be a little mentally unsound to be an artist in the first place. Uh, whether that is as a writer or the illustrator or anything, all, as a previous panelist said, everything in content creation is art. So you kind of have to be a little bit of a flake to be an artist. And part of your goal is getting that flake leashed up and doing what you want them to do. So I will act as the editor, talking to the different hats that I wear. And I will yell at myself quite a lot. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this. This is just how I get myself to work. So the next phase, when I do start illustrating, is penciling. I don't have any of my own pencils available because I am a really lazy person and I end up inking directly over my pencils. Not necessarily a advised thing to do, but screw it. So this is penciling from Mark Oliver from that rabbit-related story that I said that went down the pipelines. And this is the scene of the girl, kind of almost like a werewolf transformation, going from in a bathroom from being her normal self to this rabbit girl. So penciling is very important. A lot of times a writer or the artist will do thumbnails first. I don't have them available. The artist, Ray Miss, who was doing the story with the orphan that I showed, did send me thumbnails originally. I just don't have them to show. And thumbnails are basically really quick sketches. It's a storyboard for your comic. You just don't worry about making them look good. They're just supposed to show what's happening in the panel and the order that the flow of the panels. It will end up showing like camera angle, how many characters are in it, if the character is doing anything interesting. And that's actually a good way to learn how to set up a page. If you're a writer, I would highly recommend at least practicing your illustrator skills enough to make thumbnails to send people. It makes communication a lot easier. And if you know how to draw, even just barely, if you're above the stick figure page, it also makes it easier to communicate with an artist, period, because you start to understand what they want from a script. It's a very important thing. Stan, obviously you know this because you're an animator and you did that whole kind of like a thumbnail storyboard for the animation before the festival. So you know easily, if you're working with other people, if you do the job, you know what they want from it. It makes everything a lot easier. Uh, we actually got a very important question I see right here, right? And it's from Kibby. And it's from somebody with a busy schedule. When do you take the time to make a comic and know when to update? Since I'm busy doing portfolio work, I worry that comics won't be a worthy pursuit despite it showing storytelling capabilities. Would you recommend artists still practice making comics anyway? Yes, actually, comics are some of the best portfolio work you can do, honestly, because not just does it show storytelling capability, you can just show multiple examples of your artwork on one single page because you're going to be doing basically a full image in every single panel, right? What I would recommend if you have a busy schedule is a web comic would be the best way to do that. Web comics are great for people with busy schedules. And you want to set out what you feel comfortable. If you think you can only get a page every other week, then just set your schedule for the webcomic a page every other week. And if you hit that schedule and that deadline, your audience will keep coming back to see it because people get used to regular schedules, and it's pretty healthy for you. If you could hit once a week, I would recommend once a week. That's the average upload for webcomics. When I first started, I have the most inconsistent webcomic schedule. I have no idea why people follow me, to be honest, other than the fact that I guess they just really like the stories that I write. Um, when I started, I was actually doing 2 pages a week, very consistently. Then my life got busier, and I haven't uploaded a page. Let's see. Well, if I count the manga, I haven't uploaded a page since August because I made a manga last summer. If I count the main webcomic, I haven't uploaded a page since last May because life has been that busy. And I have people yelling at me to upload new pages. I mirror it multiple places. Between all of the places that I mirror my comic, it's been viewed close to 100,000 times now, which I'm like, why? Why are you guys following this? I never update. But I'm thankful. I mean, thank you for following me if you do. Just do a schedule that's comfortable. Don't be like me. Actually try to meet your schedule. Be regular and just stretch it off as far as you feel you need to. If you can only do a page a month, just say, hey, on the first of every single month, I'm going to upload a page. People are happy with that as long as they can follow along. Is Newgrounds a good place to upload your webcomic? Yeah, actually, it's not a bad place. Because Newgrounds art portal is great. It'll let you upload a page of like any size. If you want to do something closer to a webtoon, you can just put like the first panel as your upload and then put the rest of the panels down in the description area, the author notes. What you can do, and this is something that I do, I'll probably put the individual links to them in the panel chat after I'm done. You can actually use the playlist feature to organize all your pages to make it easier for people to follow despite gaps in uploads with other art in between. Because it's really hard to go into like your the more section of your art gallery and to figure out which one of these little thumbnails is one of your comic pages and which one is just another piece of art that you uploaded. So if you use the playlist feature and put everything in a playlist, you can only put up to 100 things in a playlist, but I cut my things up into volumes anyway. So these 4 comics right here, other side, are 1 volume. Actually, this one goes in the back. And every single volume that I do is 3 chapters of X Dynamis Chaos, followed up by an intermission chapter of a Hymn of Valor. They're tangentially related stories that are kind of important to each other. And that will be slightly less than 100 pages. So that ends up fitting in there nicely. So I have like volume 1, then volume 2. You can use the playlist feature. It makes things a lot easier. And we'll get to that question later, the how do you share and market webcomics, when I actually get closer to the production side of things. So after you're done with penciling, you actually could go to coloring right from here if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. It depends on what you're doing. It also depends if you plan on coloring your comic or not. So there's really 2 accepted ways to do comics. You can either do them in black and white or you can do them in full color. Black and white is a lot faster for most people in general. You're dealing entirely in values, so there's some neat things that you can do in black and white for directing the page, because you want to make your panels in a way that it points people to the next panel, which I'll describe in a second. But basically, most comics are going to be inked, whether it is by hand, whether it's digitally, it doesn't matter. This page is an example from the manga I made last summer of just the inks. Talk about direction. As you can see, you would be reading this from left to right instead of right to left because it is built as a manga. But you see, even the panels are cut in a way that it keeps feeding you. I'm like reversed. It feeds you downwards across. I also have examples here That was done on actual sketch card. The normal webcomic, I don't waste good pages on. I just use printer paper. You can use anything. This one would be read from, sorry, yeah. The other one was right to left. This is left to right. So you see there's this jumping action that kind of directs you up, and then the guy's falling down. And then you have the other character jumping across the screen. And my panels are actually kind of designed to match the way you would read it to keep directing you to the next panel. Other examples here, it inks from a page that I haven't put this book out yet. This is not as good an example of directing somebody across the page, but that's because this one's kind of just read straight down almost. But when you're dealing with inks, you're kind of also just dealing with values, so that's very important. I had one more example of an inked page. Yeah, here we go. Oh, that's tiny. And you don't have to ink in black. You can ink in any color. It's basically just going to be whatever your line art is. Sometimes you may not have lines that are visible at the end, but you should have some type of finished inked version before you move on to coloring, even if you just end up erasing all of it later. One of the reasons we cut the phases down into this is for writers and artists talking to each other. You want to be able to send these finished process pieces to your writer or editor so that you can figure out, like, am I doing things right? Am I hitting it on the head? Do I need to change some stuff? Because it would suck if you just went all the way to a finished colored page and, like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You kind of want to make your check-ins. And I still do things in this process, so I check in with myself, look at the full thing, is like, is this really what I wanted? Now, because I ink directly on my pencils, I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot, because if I'm not happy with it, I kind of have to throw the paper away and just start over. Don't do that. After we're done with the inks, though, all I have left to show before we get into the actual production stuff, which we are like halfway through, is finished pages. But the next step is coloring, and then after coloring is lettering. So I'll talk about both of those kind of at the same time, which I have them on the other side. First off, I'm going to show a black and white page because this is technically a colored page. After I was done with the inking, digitally, I went in and I added extra tones to it. Some of them I made myself. Some of them are using like actual pre-rendered tones. This page looks like it's in grayscale, but it's entirely black and white. There is no gray in here. Every color is either 0% K or 100% K, which is black ink. And I'm using different techniques to make it seem like there are grays in there. Aside from that, an actual colored page of mine will end up looking something more like this. This is the webcomic. I don't spend too much time making the colors look good on the webcomic because when you are working on it, it's something that you're trying to get out fast. The webcomic is telling basically the backbone story for my world, and it's also advertisement for the other stuff that I'm working on, because having a webcomic is really good advertisement for your premium stuff. It gets people invested in reading. A better page, going back to that one that I from the story that I haven't put out yet. This is kind of what a finished page will look like. Lettering is actually a part of the art that people don't realize. They think it's like, oh, you're just adding words to the page now. You can use lettering to direct the reader. So like I was talking about before with the inking, this page isn't a good example of directing the reader across it. When I actually get to the lettering phase, though, I can solve that problem. So we start in the top corner here. Let me point the other side. Here we go. Top corner here, where we have this whole somewhere in the Mediterranean at the very top. The manor is in the center down, so it actually ends up pointing you to the guy that there. Then this guy's opening the door. The click actually points you down to the panel with the hands, and the motion of those hands actually point you into the last panel. So these are things you want to think about. If you're a writer that doesn't do art as well, another thing I would suggest getting into lettering, because You don't want your artist to feel like they're holding all the weight in your comic. It's a good way to become disgruntled with your writer really fast, especially if you're doing a full, like just a collaborative effort and nobody's getting paid until later. Otherwise, if you're a writer that doesn't do anything but write, save up money and pay for an artist. That's the only advice I can really give you. Um, Examples of pages that I've made with other people as they're finished. Here is, oh man, that got like really big really fast. And that's because I actually already had that loaded as another page. Where is it? This one. Um, Here is that scene with the orphan girl. Again, the one that wasn't inked in black. As you can see, there still is almost no pure black on this page, even after the coloring process. You any art works. You can do any style of art for comics as long as it is readable, right? The big thing about making art in comics is that you want the illustration to be as readable or legible as the words on the page because you are telling a story. It's you don't get to work in animation where you can actually have a character moving. You have to do like implied animation. So people are actually reading images in what you can otherwise call graphic literature. Um, and here's actually really didn't like the colors in this page. I sent it back like several times, which might be one of the problems why we didn't end up finishing. It was just way too starch, even after I did some like print tests. But these are what some finished pages look like. Variations of lettering. Lettering is actually one of the most important parts of making comics, and people don't realize that like at all. Letters are a job that are slept on by readers, and it's sad because that's actually what you spend most of the time reading, believe it or not. And what programs do you use? I use Photoshop for everything, but I'm also just a graphic artist in general. So Illustrator, Photoshop are mostly just what I use for any type of graphic art. I do all my penciling and inking by hand, so I don't actually end up using Illustrator a lot. I just kind of do all my coloring and lettering in Photoshop. It's easy that way. Clip Studio Paint is really good. I've got a lot of comic creator friends on the professional industry level who use Clip Studio Paint. Highly recommended if you can afford it. Some other good alternative programs for comic creation. Metabang, Art Street. They have a program, Metabang Paint. Really, really good. It's basically just a free version of Clip Studio. Not as versatile, but it can do everything you need it to do. It even has speed lines that you can pre-render right in there. They also have one that's specifically for making manga, which is the Jump Studio Paint or Jump Paint Studio. I forget the order of the name. They are partnered with Shonen Jump. It actually has manga making tutorials in it. So I would definitely get the Jump Paint. You can find it on Metabang's site. Just go to metabang.com. It has all the resources there, completely free. You can get started on this stuff today for free. You don't have to spend money on a program. Uh, the Honestly, actually, here's the most important part. Whether you're doing a webcomic or not, if you're doing anything that's serial, something that has issues or chapters, you need to figure out what your cover is going to look like because your cover is going to sell it to somebody and should probably be the first page that you upload for every new chapter. For example, my webcomic, this is the cover of the most recent chapter where the main characters are searching for aliens in New Mexico and end up running into a whole bunch of problems. So I even gave like the title text this kind of like green, glowy, alienish color, give it like an X-Files feel. Uh, we also have the cover of that other unreleased story where she's kind of like a jewel thief breaking into a mansion. Uh, and I also have the cover of that manga that I made that even though it's completely black and white, the cover you still kind of want to make in color. If you're going to be uploading a webcomic, if you're going to be making a print comic, the cover is kind of the first thing you need to think of on the art end. It's very important. It's the first thing anybody's going to see of your comic. Even if you're doing something that's more of just like strips or classic sequentials, you at least want to make a header or cover image for that series of strips that you're going to use once so people can get an idea of what they're in for, whether you want to make it something funny looking because they know it's a gag comic. If you want to make it something that's very sentimental because it's a romance comic, doesn't matter. You need to sell your story through the cover. It's very, very important. Um, so now we're mostly into the production stuff from here, and I'll cover a couple of the questions that we had before that, that are pre-production or during the creation phase. Technically, everything's production, but for the case of this, when I'm talking about production, I'm talking about actually uploading, um, printing, selling your comic, whatever you're doing. One of these questions was, what font would you refer to use? That's a tough one because it really depends on what type of story you're telling. You really want to use lettering and fonts that match your comic style. For my main webcomic, because it's kind of somewhere between Cape Comics and Shonen stories, I use a font called VTC Letterer Pro, and it kind of looks like classic superhero comics. Um, for that Jewel Thief story, I use a font family called Comica, which starts with a K. It's a Komika, which is a really good one. There's all kinds of like free to use, as long as you're just not repackaging and trying to sell the font itself. Fonts out there. I go to Font Squirrel. I really like Font Squirrel as a graphic designer that does this stuff for freelance. There's a lot of free to use stuff as long as you're not trying to resell the font itself that you can use commercially. I would just go there and I would type in the word comic, and there's a lot of really good stuff there. I probably have over 100 different fonts that I can use for comics for precisely that reason. What is your writing process? And how do you come up with ideas for every next comic? My writing process is going for walks. The last panelist did mention the how necessary it is to go outside. I've been walking around town since I was 9 years old, mostly because my mother was irresponsible and locked me and my brothers outside. But what it's led to is I would have conversations with people while going on walks. My brothers, who were younger and I had to watch, my friends, because I got so used to walking around town, I would start dragging them on walks with me. And even I would start going on walks by myself. And I got so used to talking to people on my walks that I started talking to myself on walks. It's also why when vlogging became common on YouTube, I just started talking to a camera sometimes because I was just so used to talking on a walk. And I'll talk to myself and I'll brainstorm story ideas while walking. And you're like moving, you're getting oxygen to your brain because of the cardiovascular motion. You start thinking about things you wouldn't think just sitting down inside. Just go for walks if you can. If you're in an area where you feel safe enough to go for a walk, or just you as a person feel safe enough to go for a walk, I will sometimes walk for 5 to 10 miles straight as I brainstorm stories before I actually get down to writing them. I basically have a whole story done in my head before I get the words on paper. Or to exercise, go to the gym, or exercise around your house. Anything that gets that oxygen flowing to your brain will help you come up with ideas. And also, I know every single introvert is going to hate hearing this. I guess I benefit from the fact that I'm not really an introvert. So I have a lot of life experience. You got to go out and you got to talk to people and you got to actually live an interesting life to some degree if you want to tell interesting stories. Like, it's necessary. Even if it's just hopping in calls and talking to people, your characters will feel more alive if you have people that you can draw personality from. Almost all of my characters, even the ones that aren't based directly off of real people, have personalities that are influenced from real people. Just like when you're making art and you're referencing images to try to make something look better, you need to reference actual personalities and real people to make your characters feel more like believable people. So those are my two things. Mhm. 15 minutes. Okay. Yes. So we're in the production side of things now, which honestly will take the least amount of time to talk about. So I figured we could save that for the end. This is where you should have already decided this beforehand, but this is where you're actually going to go to uploading or releasing your comic. If you're making a web comic, there are several ways to do it. The most popular way now is to use webtoons, um, which I do use things like webtoons and Tapas to mirror my comic, but I don't do their format, so they don't get a whole lot of views there. Surprisingly, still enough. People just kind of like reading things. Newgrounds, like I said, is a great place you can upload your art. If you use the playlist feature, it can be great for hosting a comic because people can just go there. They can click on that page, click back, go to the next one. It'll even show if they've already clicked on it, so you can actually kind of save your place in a way if your browser has like the cookies and cache enabled. I have my own website that I use, which I did bring up earlier when I was showing my contribution page. I like directing people there, but I don't want to limit people on how they can read it. But you can actually just go to my site and you can read like any single random page of my webcomic. It doesn't matter, you know? I also print them. So if you are somebody who is trying to get into actually physically producing your comic, especially because there's a lot of people who are just sticklers about the old age of comics and they want something physical they can hold in their hands as they read it. What I would suggest, the cheapest way to do this is print on demand. You could do a Kickstarter, you could do like a big campaign if you already have an audience, but you're not going to grow an audience that way. You can always contact me. I can give you personal advice on this stuff. Advising people is actually something that I do, of the many, many things I do. But you can go to Kablam, KA-BLAM, and Kablam is a printing service, right? They will print your comics in bulk if you want to sell them in bulk, but if you want to just do print on demand, you can order a single copy of your comic for yourself. And then after you have your proof and confirm it, you can actually set up the metadata for your comic to be sold on their website, Indie Planet, which if you go to my stores, xdynamuschaos.com/store, I actually don't sell copies of my comic in print runs. I have, if I'm going to a convention or something, I'll obviously print up a bunch. But all of those links just lead you straight to Indie Planet where you can order them at any time. I personally like print on demand because one thing I hate is limited runs and not being able to start a story from the very beginning. So you can actually just go back and order episode 1 through whatever of my comics and start at any point in time. I love the internet for this exact reason. That's my personal recommendation. If you're somebody who doesn't have an audience and is trying to get started. If you're trying to make the big bucks in comics, well, don't. If you're making comics, it's probably because you hate yourself. Nobody reads comics outside of for free on the web, and I'm not joking about that. If you make comics, you do it for a passion. Honestly, it's because you like the medium. You read it yourself. It's a good way to tell stories. Of all industries for creating art and storytelling, comics are probably the one that makes the least amount of money. Uh, Over in Japan, they're doing great, but even then, it's like, well, they get killed by every other form of entertainment over there, and a lot of people are using it just to be able to get an anime later on. Make comics because you're passionate about it. You could get lucky if you have an audience and do like a Kickstarter Indiegogo and just knock it out of the park and make like $1 million on your comic. The odds are that nobody's going to read your comic outside of your friends for quite some time. Most web comics, until you have like 5 chapters done, people won't read. A good way to market it though is to push it everywhere. If you want people to read your comic, you actually have to go and advertise it. End of the story. You can try posting it on places like Reddit. There are subreddits for that. That's hit or miss. I really don't like Reddit as a site. There is a webcomic list that you can host it on. Top webcomics, or is it top 100? I think it's just top webcomics. You can also list it on there. Those are all hit or miss. Um, One of the best ways to actually market it, though, is to go on to, like, live streams, talk to people, go on to podcasts, actually market it like you're going on a book tour, and to have a stable schedule. Because once you do have a readership, they wanna come back for the schedule, and you don't have to do as much marketing once people are coming back regularly. Comics are actually kinda like the toughest thing to jump into. Everybody does them on the internet because they're easy. You are trying to be a diamond in a sea of coal that's just everywhere. It's hard to get noticed. You really have to make the effort yourself, but it is worth it if you like the medium. It really is. I'm lucky that, like I said, I have been viewed like 100,000 times across the different places, but I market my stuff all the time. I'm always talking about my comics to people. I have them everywhere. That's why it's been viewed so much. So, and that's not even a big viewership either, or a very consistent one. So I really wouldn't say I'm that lucky, but I would still say I'm lucky on the regard that it is hard to get noticed in comics. So if you really want to do it, just do it for the passion. Don't worry about getting noticed. And if you want to get noticed, like any other thing, you got to be out there pushing it yourself.
I really want to support what you just said because that's the reason
Yeah.
I wanted you to host this panel. You market your comic more than anyone else I know.
Yeah.
You're the comic guy of the people I know because you're always talking about it. So, and that's of all the people I know everywhere, you're the one who's always doing the work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to. It's a hustle. It's like anything else. It's a hustle. Um, but that's pretty much it for production. In general, there's not much to it. If you're going to be selling your books to actually make a real profit, then yeah, you're probably going to want to be buying them in bulk, uh, so that it's cheaper for you. There are price cuts the more you order, and then you'll probably want to be upscaling the price on that just a bit and shipping out to people manually with your own store. That is probably the most profitable way to sell your comic. But then there's a lot of overhead on that because you have to actually buy it in bulk first, and then you're going to be charging for shipping, and it becomes a nightmare. It's worth it though if you're into it. It also means you'll probably have a lot of stock on hand for conventions. That's something you have to do. You have to go and sell your comic at conventions, which I guess this is something I could be doing. Some people might order stuff here, but this whole panel is not about me talking about my comics. It's about the creation process. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it. If anybody has questions specifically now for, I guess, like the final 7 minutes of this panel, I could just answer anything free flow, anything we missed, if anybody has something new.
Yeah, I have a question from Standpie. Standpie wants to know.
Okay.
Standpie wants to know when you are ready to put your digital work into print, what is that turnaround? What is it like, and who do you talk to if you want to get those physical copies? Going from I've got a bunch of pages that I've made. Maybe there are just a bunch of PNGs that I've saved, and I have a folder for page 1 through page 30. How do I convert that into a printed piece?
Okay, so that depends. If you're working with Kablam, which is what I normally do, then you actually don't need to make a PDF. I've gotten pretty used to making PDFs, like print ready PDFs at this point in time. I use Scribus, which is just a free program for making PDFs. Highly recommended. But Kablam doesn't make you do that. You actually need TIF files, TIFFs, which you can easily just convert a PNG to a TIFF, or it makes printing and scaling easier. You can just save your PDF or your Clip Studio Paint file as a TIFF because TIFFs save all the layers, and you will just give it to them. They have a certain like format for naming your pages, ordering your page and stuff. All that's on the site. They've got resources for it, but you'll compress that folder into a zip and send it to them, and they'll send you your proof. Like it's pretty easy. It's not hard. If you're already doing art, you probably know how to work with TIFF files. It's pretty straightforward.
Bro Magnon wants to know what's a good size for webcomic pages.
Again, that depends on what you're doing. So if you do want to make them print later, you need to be working in no less than 300 DPI. I work in 600 DPI. That's dots per inch, which is something you need to know for printing. The higher the DPI, the higher the quality of the print will be later. If you're only ever working on the web, you can work with 72 DPI. So your average comic page is, oh God, what's the definition again? It's like 7 by 10, if you count the print bleeds. Which if you just set your actual DPI to whatever it's going to be, it'll give you the pixel definition for that. I think I end up working at like 4200 by 6300 as my pages, or the other way around, 6300 by 4200, because you want it in portrait. That's if you're doing it a comic page. If you're doing it like a webtoon, then you can work with like your actual, what's it called, canvas. Your canvas can be like 1000 by 1000, with just like whatever room the panel takes up, black or white on each side, and then that'll give you enough scroll room between each of the panels, and they can just keep scrolling. Because the whole thing about like the infinite scroll format is at any point in time you only want to see one panel, so you have to leave a lot of space in between. So by the time you're done scrolling with the next one, the last one, the next panel showing up. But that's about it. I like working at 600 DPI. I feel like I just have a lot of slack to deal with, and things are easier to compress it downward than they are to scale up. So Kablam prefers 300 DPI. If I'm working at 600, I just drop it down to 300 afterwards. I don't actually really lose anything. Things don't become grainier or anything, which is what happens when you go in the other direction.
Space Skeletons wants to know, I've heard a lot of comic creators telling new people to publish a small comic first before jumping into long-term works. Is that something you recommend?
Um, I would say start with some shorts. I already had basically this whole story written. X Dynamis Chaos is actually an adaptation of a novel that I wrote, Act 1, that I'm still writing forward. You can read it. It's different formats. I do different things in each one because you don't want a one-to-one adaptation. But yeah, I would say start with some shorts to get a feel for the format first. Maybe even if you're going to publish a book, a series of shorts, like an anthology, maybe each thing is like 4 to 8 pages, or maybe you do like 3 10-page shorts for a 30-page comic or something. But if you have a story ready, just start going. You know, it's like writing pulps or shorts online. Just start going with it. Honestly, I would not discourage it.
KCJ567 asks, what's one of your favorite comics that you have made with your team?
Well, for the most part, I am my team.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've worked with some shorts with some couple other people, and I'm still always working with other people to make some shorts. But all the long form comics so far have just been me. But my favorite comic I've made so far is probably the manga I made last summer, which is called Realms and Relics, which is about a dude who is going across the 9 realms looking for this like really ancient treasure, but he's got to find like a different treasure from each realm to be a cipher for where the actual vault is, and he's like picking up people on the way. It's really wacky. It's really fun. It's about as chaotic as any of my comics are. One of the reasons I call it X Dynamis Chaos is because it literally translates to a of bountiful chaos, or of plentiful chaos. I just like things that are, so crazy they're more real than real, if that makes any sense.
You mentioned the manga again, and I think I know the little bit of backstory on that, but specifically because you keep using the word manga, what made that one different? Why did you make it, and why do you refer to it as a manga versus your normal comics?
I was originally making it for the 100th Tezuka manga contest, which I didn't win, but I mean, God, there were so many good entries there. So I was making it with the formatting details that they gave for manga, to specifically refer to it as a manga. It's completely black and white, even though all the text is in English. I'll probably translate it to Japanese at some point. It is read from right to left. I use classic lithographic techniques for only using black but implying grays and stuff like that. Basically, it was made as if it was a Japanese manga because it was being made for a Japanese manga contest. Otherwise, I mean, it's still, sequential art. It's a comic at the end of the day, but it is kind of different than my other stuff because it was being made for that purpose.
Pam wants to know who or where do I go to talk about my comic projects ideas to know if they're good or if they need changes? Is there a place where comic creators do these things?
Oof. Like, there are communities and stuff like on Reddit and everything, but like I said, I hate Reddit. You can talk to me. Uh, I actually have a Discord for X Dynamis Chaos that's available. You can find it on the site. Not a lot of people talk in there, but I would like more people. You can connect to me directly through Discord or through Newgrounds. Follow me, add me as a friend. I'll accept a friend request from anybody. I don't care. Message me. I'll talk to you about comics. I'm connected to a lot of professional comic creators, so I kind of have an idea of what is or isn't a good comic. I mean, technically, I'm a professional comic creator myself at this point. I've made money off of selling comics, and that's what makes you a professional, is by being paid to do what you do. I just do it independently.
Right on.
I'm glad to give advice anytime.
Two final questions. First, from Micro Bihan, what do you think is the hardest comic genre to write? Examples including comedy, rom-com, etc.
The hardest to write is probably slice of life, which probably would sound weird to somebody who's not used to trying to write that type of story, because slice of life is usually supposed to be a thing that used to break a story, like to actually break the pace, give people some breather, some levity. But if you're trying to make an entire story that's slice of life, it's hard to keep that interesting, especially if you're not constantly doing interesting things in your own life to draw from. And slice of life just really gets boring fast if you don't constantly just have more things to reference to pull. It's difficult, and you see that in manga too, because some of the best manga are really well like executed slice of life, but some of the worst stuff you'll ever read is poorly executed slice of life.
It's kind of interesting, the term slice of life. It's because it's supposed to be just a slice, but some people turn it into the entire pie.
Yeah, it's weird too, right? Because at this point, it's like, well, it's a sitcom. It may not be comedy, but it's just a sitcom. But that's what the genre's become. It's supposed to just be levity within a story.
Right on. And the final question from Kevin, should we worry about originality when we have a story to make?
No, I'm going to be honest. There's nothing new under the sun. Everybody's already done everything. Now, you might do it in a fresh new way. Your voice is what's going to make something original. Like a lot of the stuff in my comics are things that pieces you might have seen before, but I arranged them in a way that only I would tell that story. Focus on your voice. That is the most important thing in any type of writing, right? If you're a novelist, if you're making animations like cartoons, if you're making comics, your voice is the most original part of whatever you do. And that is where your originality should come from.
Awesome. Well, Metal, thank you so much for this very informative panel about comic creation. Really appreciate having you here at the Newgrounds Summerfest, man.
Yeah. Anytime, man.
And
it's been fun.
One last plug for any of the stuff that you're working on, where to find you, and so on.
Like I said, I've been putting everything on Newgrounds. You can find me at I'm a Metal. It's a IMMADA Metal. Or you can find all my stuff at xdynamischaos.com. I'll drop the links in the chat again after I get off of here, because I know that can be kind of hard to spell. But you can find everything right there. Having my own site is great for giving resources to people. I even put like character bios and stuff like that. It's a fun place. You can spend hours there.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. Coming up next, we have Pixel Art Foundations, hosted by Template88. Once again, Metal, thank you. And stay tuned for more here at the Newgrounds Summerfest.